on a transatlantic flight from New York to London. Privilege and prejudice collided at 30,000 feet, creating a shockwave felt by everyone in the first-class cabin. It began with a sneer, escalated to a whisper, and erupted in a single violent act, a wealthy passenger slapping a black teenager who in her eyes simply didn't belong. But the sharp crack of her hand against his cheek was not the final word. Seconds later, the calm, authoritative voice of the pilot crackled over the intercom, delivering an announcement so precise and chilling it rendered the entire cabin silent. What he said next would not only seal the woman's fate, but would set in motion a chain of events, proving that karma sometimes doesn't wait for the final destination. The Polaris Lounge at John F. Kennedy International Airport was a sanctuary of hushed tones and clinking glasses. It was a world away from the controlled chaos of the main terminal, a pre-flight purgatory for the privileged. Here, seasoned executives rehearsed presentations in their minds. Families in matching cashmere sweaters spoke of ski trips in Aspen, and the air hummed with the low frequency of quiet importance. Into this world walked 16-year-old Jordan Brooks. He clutched his boarding pass, the bold 1B, printed on it, feeling like a foreign credential. He wasn't dressed in designer labels. His clothes were neat, practical dark jeans, a simple grey hoodie from MIT, and worn-in sneakers. On his back was a well-loved backpack, its side pocket straining with a thick paperback on quantum mechanics. He was a study in contrasts to the ambient luxury, a dissonant note in a symphony of wealth. His presence did not go unnoticed. Across the room, Caroline Harrington watched him over the rim of her champagne flute. Caroline was a woman sculpted by ambition and maintained by expensive habits. Her blonde hair was a masterpiece of strategic highlights, her suit a severe cream-colored Alexander McQueen, and the diamond on her finger was large enough to have its own gravitational pull. She was a titan in the cutthroat world of Manhattan commercial real estate, a woman who didn't just climb ladders, but kicked them out from under her competitors. She saw Jordan, and her perfectly sculpted brow furrowed. She saw a kid who looked like he'd wandered in from the economy line, a kid whose skin color in her neatly ordered worldview was statistically unlikely to be associated with a first-class ticket paid for in full. Her gaze was a physical weight, a silent interrogation. Jordan felt it. He'd felt it before. It was the familiar prickle of being assessed, of being deemed out of place. He ignored it, finding a vacant leather armchair by the large windows overlooking the tarmac. He pulled out his laptop, a high-end machine that was part of his prize, and opened a complex coding interface. The reason Jordan was here surrounded by people like Caroline was the Sterling Innovations Prize. It was one of the most prestigious STEM awards for young minds in the country, funded by the tech billionaire Robert Sterling. Jordan's project, a groundbreaking algorithm for optimizing renewable energy grids, had unanimously swept the competition. The prize included a full scholarship to the university of his choice, and this an all-expenses-paid first-class trip to London to present his findings at a global youth science summit. He hadn't asked for luxury, but it was part of the package, a world he was now, however briefly, a guest in. As boarding for Flight 114 to Heathrow was announced, Caroline made her move. She glided towards the gate, her roller bag clicking purposefully on the polished floor. She positioned herself directly behind Jordan in the priority lane. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I think you might be in the wrong line. Economy boarding is over at gate 28. Jordan turned his expression calm. "Thank you, ma'am, but my ticket is for this flight." He gestured politely with his boarding pass. Caroline's eyes narrowed, flicking from his face to the pass, a flicker of disbelief in her eyes. Let me see that. It wasn't a request. She reached out as if to snatch it. Jordan held it firmly. I'm sure the gate agent can verify it for you. The gate agent, a cheerful woman named Patricia, scanned Jordan's pass. Welcome aboard, Mr. Brooks. Enjoy your flight. She then turned to Caroline. Ma'am. Caroline's lips thinned into a bloodless line. She slapped her passport and ticket onto the counter, her glare a dagger aimed at Jordan's back as he walked down the jet bridge. To her, this wasn't just an inconvenience. It was an affront to the natural order of things. On board the Boeing 707. The first-class cabin was an oasis of beige leather and muted lighting. Jordan found his seat 1B, a spacious pod, with its own lie-flat bed and entertainment screen. He stowed his backpack and sat down feeling a genuine thrill. He'd only ever seen places like this in movies. Moments later, Caroline Harrington arrived, her face already sour, curdled completely when she saw her seat assignment 1A. She was directly across the aisle from him. She stopped short, staring at Jordan as if he were a piece of luggage mistakenly placed in her suite. You have got to be kidding me, she muttered loud enough for him and the nearby flight attendant to hear. The flight attendant, a graceful woman with a warm smile named Isabella Rossi, approached. Is there a problem, ma'am? Yes, there's a problem, Caroline snapped, gesturing towards Jordan. I paid a significant amount of money for this seat for a comfortable professional environment. I did not pay to be seated next to this. She waved a dismissive hand, not even deigning to look at him directly. Isabella's smile tightened, but her professionalism held. All our first-class passengers have paid for their seats, ma'am. Mr. Brooks is ticketed for 1B. Well, check again, Caroline demanded. There's been a mistake. He was probably upgraded by accident. He can't possibly be here. Jordan, who had been trying to read the safety card, finally looked up. He met Caroline's furious gaze with a steady, unnerving calm. There's no mistake, he said, his voice even. I'm in the right seat. Don't you speak to me, she hissed, her voice a low, venomous whisper. People like you need to learn their place. Isabella stepped between them, a human shield of corporate policy, and practiced politeness. Ma'am, I need you to take your seat. We're preparing for departure. Caroline huffed, throwing her oversized handbag into the overhead bin with unnecessary force. She slumped into her seat, pulling out her phone and pointedly angling her body away from Jordan. But her hostility was a palpable force in the small space, a static charge that promised a storm was coming. For Jordan, the excitement of the flight was already being replaced by a familiar, wearying tension. The gilded cage had bars, and he was beginning to feel them close in around him. The 707 climbed gracefully out of New York, a silver beast ascending into the darkening twilight. Below, the city's grid became a glittering tapestry before vanishing beneath a blanket of clouds. Inside the first-class cabin, the post-takeoff ritual began. The lights dimmed to a soothing hue. Hot towels were distributed, and the soft clink of champagne glasses being filled punctuated the gentle hum of the engines. Jordan, determined not to let Caroline Harrington's animosity ruin this once-in-a-lifetime experience, tried to immerse himself in the novelty of it all. He accepted a glass of orange juice and marveled at the amenities, the noise-cancelling headphones, the Bulgari toiletries kit, the menu that read more like a high-end restaurant's. He put on his headphones, selected a film, and tried to create a bubble of peace. But Caroline was not one to be ignored. Her bubble of privilege had been pierced, and she seemed intent on making everyone around her miserable. First, it was the noise. Jordan had his headphones on, but he had opened his laptop to review some notes for his London presentation. The soft, almost silent tapping of his fingers on the keyboard seemed to enrage her. She flagged down Isabella with a sharp, impatient gesture. "Excuse me," she said, her voice cutting through the cabin's quiet. "Can you tell him to stop that incessant clicking? It's impossible to relax." Isabella glanced at Jordan, who was staring at his screen, oblivious. The sound of his typing was barely audible over the plane's ambient noise. "Ma'am, I can assure you the sound is not disruptive. Perhaps I can offer you a pair of earplugs." "I don't want earplugs," Caroline snapped. "I want him to stop. This is a place for rest, not for whatever it is he's doing." Feeling the tension, Jordan removed his headphones. "Is there a problem?" he asked, directing the question to Isabella, but keenly aware of Caroline's glare. "The lady finds your typing disruptive," Isabella said, her tone apologetic. Jordan looked at his hands, then at Caroline. "I'm sorry," he said, though he knew he had nothing to apologize for. "I can try to be quieter." He slowed his typing, pressing the keys with a conscious gentleness that was both absurd and demeaning. Caroline scoffed and returned to her magazine, but she wasn't finished. During the meal service, she made a production of her displeasure. When the flight attendant served Jordan his pan-seared halibut, Caroline loudly commented to no one in particular, "I'm surprised they're serving the good food to just anyone these days." Each comment was a small paper cut, designed to bleed his confidence, to remind him that in her eyes, he was an interloper. An older gentleman across the aisle in seat 1D, a man with kind eyes and a tweed jacket who introduced himself as Arthur Penhaligon, shot Jordan a sympathetic glance. He'd seen and heard the exchange and gave a slight disapproving shake of his head in Caroline's direction. The breaking point came about 3 hours into the flight. Jordan had finished his meal and was deeply engrossed in his work, a complex series of equations glowing on his screen. He had a sudden breakthrough, a solution to a minor flaw in his algorithm that had been nagging him for weeks. A genuine, unself-conscious smile spread across his face. He quickly grabbed a pen and a napkin to scribble down the notation before he forgot it. Caroline saw the smile. To her, in her state of paranoid entitlement, it was a look of smugness, of defiance. It was the smile of someone who was getting away with something. It was the final straw. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up, looming over him. "What is so funny?" she demanded. Jordan looked up, startled from his concentration. "I'm sorry. I saw you smirking. You think this is all a big joke, don't you? Getting a free ride, bothering the paying customers." "Ma'am, I was just working," Jordan said, his voice remaining level, a feat of immense self-control. "I solved a problem I've been working on. It has nothing to do with you." "Everything you do has to do with me." She spat, her voice rising in pitch, turning heads throughout the cabin. "You sit there with that stolen laptop, pretending you belong here. I know your type. You probably conned your way on here." Isabella rushed over. "Ma'am, you need to sit down. You are causing a disturbance." But Caroline was beyond reason. She was in a rage fueled by prejudice and champagne. Jordan's composure, his refusal to be baited, seemed to infuriate her more than any argument could have. He decided to make one last appeal to reason. He looked her directly in the eye. "My name is Jordan Brooks. I won the Sterling Innovations Prize. This flight is part of the award for my work in computational science. I have earned my place in this seat, ma'am, just as much as you have." He said it clearly, without malice, a simple statement of fact. But for Caroline, it was the ultimate insult. That this boy, this teenager, would dare to claim equality with her was unthinkable. Her carefully constructed world of hierarchy and status crumbled in that moment, replaced by pure, unadulterated fury. Her face twisted into a mask of rage. "You insolent little—" Before she could finish the sentence, her arm swung out. The movement was fast, vicious, and shockingly loud in the confined space. The sharp, ugly crack of her open palm connecting with Jordan's cheek echoed through the cabin. For a heartbeat, there was absolute silence. The in-flight movies, the quiet conversations, the hum of the engines, it all seemed to fade away. Jordan's head was snapped to the side, a bright red mark already blooming on his dark skin. He didn't cry out. He didn't retaliate. He simply sat there, stunned, the equations on his napkin forgotten. Then chaos. Isabella gasped, "Ma'am!" and grabbed Caroline's arm. Arthur Penhaligon was half out of his seat, his face a thundercloud of outrage. "I saw that. That was assault," he boomed. Other passengers were staring their mouths agape. A phone camera was discreetly raised. Caroline seemed as shocked as anyone by her own actions. She looked at her hand, then at Jordan, her fury momentarily replaced by a flicker of panic. But it was quickly subsumed by her instinct for self-preservation. "He was threatening me," she yelled, her voice shrill. "You all saw it. He was aggressive. It was a lie, so blatant, so contrary to the quiet dignity Jordan had displayed, that it hung in the air absurd and obscene. Isabella was already on the intercom phone to the cockpit, her voice low but urgent. Jordan just sat there, the stinging on his cheek, a physical manifestation of the ugly reality he had tried so hard to ignore. At 30,000 feet in a cabin designed for ultimate comfort and luxury, the rawest form of prejudice had just broken through the surface, and nothing would ever be the same. The aftermath of the slap was a tableau of suspended animation. Caroline Harrington stood panting, her hand still tingling, her eyes wide with a mixture of fury and fear. Jordan Brooks remained seated, his cheek throbbing, the shock waves of the impact radiating through him. The other passengers were frozen, their faces a gallery of disbelief and disgust. The only movement was from Isabella and her fellow flight attendant, who were now flanking Caroline, their professional demeanor a stark contrast to the raw violence of the moment. "Ma'am, please return to your seat and fasten your seatbelt immediately," Isabella commanded, her voice no longer warm but cold and hard as steel. "You will not speak to or approach this passenger again." "He provoked me," Caroline insisted, her voice trembling with manufactured victimhood. "I felt threatened. I was defending myself. That's an absolute fabrication." Arthur Penhaligon's voice cut through her protests. He was now standing fully in the aisle. "I have been watching this entire exchange. The young man has been a model of decorum. You, madam, have been harassing him since we boarded. I witnessed you assault him without any provocation whatsoever. It was a cowardly and despicable act." His words, delivered with the weight of unimpeachable authority, seemed to deflate Caroline. The support she might have hoped to rally from her fellow first-class travelers was non-existent. All she saw were condemning eyes. Isabella spoke into the in-flight phone again, relaying the witness's account to the flight deck. Jordan finally moved, lifting a hand to his cheek. The physical pain was nothing compared to the humiliation, the sheer injustice of it all. He had done everything right. He had been polite, patient, and restrained. And for his efforts, he had been met with violence. He looked around the cabin and saw something that surprised him. In seat 2A, a man in a simple dark sweater, who had been quietly reading a book since takeoff, was now watching the scene with a look of intense, cold anger. He hadn't said a word, but his gaze was fixed on Caroline. It was a gaze that held an unsettling level of authority. Jordan vaguely recognized him from the award ceremony, but couldn't place him in the fog of the moment. It was then, not 2 minutes after the slap, that a soft chime echoed through the cabin, the sound that precedes a pilot's announcement. Every passenger from first class to the last row of economy instinctively fell silent. Usually it was a mundane update about turbulence or arrival times. This was different. The voice that came over the PA system was calm, measured, and utterly devoid of ambiguity. It was the voice of a man in complete control. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain David Macmillan speaking." A pause. It was just long enough to draw every ounce of attention. "I need to inform you of a change in our flight plan. A few moments ago in our first-class cabin, we had a Level 4 incident as defined by international aviation safety regulations. This involves an act of physical aggression and assault by one passenger against another." The air in the cabin became thick. The words assault and Level 4 hung there, official and damning. Caroline Harrington's face went from pale to ashen. The anonymity of a mid-flight conflict had just been stripped away, laid bare for all 300 souls on board to hear. The captain continued, his voice as steady as a rock. "The safety and security of our passengers and crew is our absolute non-negotiable priority. This aircraft maintains a zero-tolerance policy for any form of violence, intimidation, or harassment. The passenger who initiated the assault was also witnessed verbally harassing a minor." A collective gasp rippled through the aircraft. The word minor added a new sickening layer to the event. Caroline looked as if she'd been struck herself. "As a result of this incident," Captain Macmillan went on, his tone leaving no room for argument, "I have made the decision to divert this aircraft. We are no longer en route to London Heathrow. In accordance with federal law and airline policy, we will be landing at the nearest suitable airport, which is Boston Logan International Airport. Upon our arrival, the aircraft will be met by law enforcement. The passenger responsible for the assault will be removed from the flight and handed over to their custody." A dead silence fell over the plane. It was a silence so profound it felt like the pressure had dropped. The only sound was the ever-present hum of the engines, now seeming to carry them not towards a European vacation or a business meeting, but towards a reckoning. Caroline Harrington sank into her seat, her mouth opening and closing silently like a fish. The bluster, the arrogance, the self-righteous fury, it all evaporated, replaced by the cold, stark reality of what was about to happen. She hadn't just gotten into an argument. She had committed a federal offense. She hadn't just slapped a kid. She had assaulted a minor, and in doing so had forced a multi-million-dollar aircraft with hundreds of people to divert its course. Captain Macmillan had one final thing to say. "We will be beginning our descent into Boston shortly. I apologize to the vast majority of you for the significant inconvenience this will cause. We will do everything we can to get you to London as soon as possible. Thank you for your understanding." The intercom clicked off. The silence that followed was different. It was heavy with judgment. No one looked at Jordan with pity anymore. They looked at him with respect for his restraint, and they looked at Caroline Harrington with a uniform, silent contempt. She had made her choice, and now the pilot, an unseen authority from his locked cockpit, had delivered his decree. There would be no appeal. The rest of the flight to Boston would be her long, quiet walk to the gallows. The descent into Boston was surreal. The normal chatter and movement of a cabin preparing for landing were replaced by a tense, watchful quiet. Flight attendants moved with crisp efficiency, their faces unreadable masks of professionalism, but their eyes carefully avoided Caroline Harrington. She sat rigid in her seat, a pariah in cream-colored McQueen. She alternated between staring blankly out the window at the unfamiliar coastline and glaring at anyone whose gaze lingered on her for too long. Her aura of superiority had been shattered, leaving behind only the jagged edges of a woman cornered. Jordan, for his part, felt a strange sense of detachment. The sting on his cheek had subsided to a dull ache. Isabella had quietly brought him an ice pack wrapped in a linen napkin. He held it to his face not just for the swelling, but as a physical anchor in a situation that felt increasingly unreal. He watched the city lights of Boston grow closer, a destination he had never intended to visit, a place that would now be an indelible chapter in his life story. Arthur Penhaligon leaned across the aisle, his voice a low, reassuring rumble. "Young man, are you all right?" "My name is Arthur. I was a district court judge for 30 years. I saw exactly what happened, and I want you to know I will give a full and accurate statement to the authorities. What she did was inexcusable." "Thank you, sir. I appreciate that," Jordan said, his voice a little hoarse. The validation from a stranger, a man of evident stature, was a small comfort in the swirling vortex of his emotions. As the plane taxied towards a remote gate after a firm landing, the man in seat 2A finally acted. He unbuckled his seatbelt, stood up, and walked not towards the front of the plane, but back to the galley where Isabella and the chief purser were conferring. He was of average height and build, with graying temples and a face that was pleasant but easily forgotten in a crowd. But when he spoke, his voice carried an innate command that made both crew members stand a little straighter. "My name is Robert Sterling," he said quietly, holding out a hand to the purser. "I believe you know my company sponsors your airline's corporate travel program." The purser's eyes widened in recognition. He was shaking hands with one of the most powerful men in the tech industry, a name synonymous with innovation and immense wealth. He was the Sterling of the Sterling Innovations Prize. "Mr. Sterling, of course. I'm so sorry for this disruption to your flight." Robert Sterling waved a dismissive hand. "The disruption is the least of my concerns. The young man who has assaulted Jordan Brooks, he's my guest on this flight. He is the grand prize winner of my foundation's Youth Science Award. He is flying to London to represent the absolute best of American ingenuity." Isabella's face, already pale, lost another shade of color. The incident had just escalated from a random act of passenger violence to an assault on the personal guest of one of the world's most influential CEOs. Sterling's voice was calm, but his eyes were like chips of ice. "I want to be very clear about what needs to happen. I want to ensure that Mr. Brooks is handled with the utmost care and respect. I will personally accompany him off the plane. I want the authorities to have my name and a full statement, and I want to know the name of the passenger who assaulted him. Her name is Caroline Harrington," the purser supplied, reading from the manifest. A flicker of something recognition perhaps crossed Sterling's face. "Harrington, of Harrington Properties." "I believe so, sir. Her corporate account is listed on the booking." Sterling nodded slowly, a grim, calculating look on his face. "I see. That clarifies a few things." He turned his attention back to Jordan. "That young man has shown more grace and maturity in the last hour than Ms. Harrington has likely shown in her entire life. He is a testament to his character. She is a testament to something else entirely." He walked back to his seat just as the pilot announced that all passengers were to remain seated until the authorities had boarded. The jet bridge connected with a soft bump, and the cabin door was opened. Two uniformed officers from the Massachusetts State Police and an agent from the Port Authority stepped onto the plane. They were tall, impassive, and their presence instantly amplified the gravity of the situation. They conferred quietly with the purser and Isabella, who pointed discreetly towards seat 1A. One of the officers approached Caroline. "Ma'am, my name is Trooper O'Malley. I'm going to have to ask you to gather your personal belongings and come with us." Caroline's face, which had been a mask of sullen silence, contorted with renewed arrogance. "This is ridiculous. I am the victim here. I was harassed and threatened. I have a very powerful lawyer." "You will have every opportunity to make a statement downtown, ma'am." The trooper said, his voice flat and unimpressed. "Right now you are being removed from this aircraft. Please do not make this any more difficult than it needs to be." Her eyes darted around, looking for an ally, for someone who would see her side of the story. She found none. She saw only the cold stare of Robert Sterling, the quiet dignity of Jordan, and the righteous anger of Arthur Penhaligon. Defeated, she slowly began to gather her things, her movements jerky with fury. As she was escorted down the aisle, a passenger in business class held up their phone, the screen clearly recording. "Smile for the camera, Karen," someone muttered from the back, and a few people snickered. The humiliation was absolute. As she passed seat 2A, Robert Sterling spoke, his voice low enough that only she and the officers could hear. "Miss Harrington," he said, "you just assaulted the future, and I promise you the past is not going to be on your side." Her head whipped around, a confused, panicked look on her face. She didn't understand the connection, but she understood the threat. The quiet man in the simple sweater was not just another passenger. He was an arbiter of her fate, an unseen observer who had now stepped into the light, and his presence signaled that her fall was going to be much longer and harder than she could ever have imagined. The sterile fluorescent lighting of Boston Logan International Airport felt harsh after the curated ambience of the first-class cabin. For Caroline Harrington, it was the lighting of a nightmare. The walk from the plane, flanked by state troopers, was a gauntlet of curious and condemning stares from the ground crew and airport staff. Her threats of lawsuits and her frantic name-dropping of New York legal firms fell on deaf ears. The troopers had heard it all before. To them, she wasn't a real estate mogul. She was just another unruly passenger who had crossed a line. She was led not through the public terminal, but to a small, windowless office in a restricted area. The reality of her situation began to sink in with crushing weight. The power she wielded in boardrooms and at charity galas meant nothing here. Here she was, just a name on an incident report. Meanwhile, Robert Sterling ensured Jordan was handled very differently. He, Jordan, and Arthur Penhaligon were the last to deplane, escorted by an airline representative to a private lounge reserved for high-value customers. The airline, now acutely aware that they had a PR catastrophe on their hands involving a minor and a VVIP, was in full damage control mode. "Jordan, I am profoundly sorry for what you just endured," Sterling said, his tone one of sincere paternal concern. "No one, least of all a brilliant young mind like yours, should ever be subjected to that kind of ignorance and violence." "I'm okay," Jordan said, though his hands still had a slight tremor. "It just happened so fast." "You handled yourself with a level of composure I'm not sure I would have possessed," Sterling admitted. "I was a few seats back. I saw the whole thing unfold. I was about to intervene when she assaulted you. Frankly, your restraint was remarkable." An airline executive, looking stressed and apologetic, hurried into the lounge. "Mr. Sterling, Mr. Brooks." "Mr. Penhaligon." "We are so terribly sorry. We have arranged for a private jet to take you to London City Airport. It can be ready in 90 minutes. We've also booked you into the Savoy with our compliments." Sterling nodded. "That's acceptable. First, however, we need to speak with the authorities. I want to ensure they have our complete and corroborating statements." The process was professional and thorough. A detective from the state police took their statements one by one. Arthur Penhaligon, with his judicial background, gave a precise, damning account of Caroline's escalating aggression and the unprovoked nature of the slap. His testimony was ironclad. When it was Jordan's turn, he recounted the events calmly and factually, from the first condescending remark in the JFK lounge to the final violent outburst. He didn't embellish or editorialize. He didn't need to. The facts were enough. Sterling's statement was the final nail in the coffin. He detailed not only the assault, but framed it within the context of who Jordan was. "This wasn't just an attack on a passenger," Sterling explained to the detective. "This was an attack on a young scholar, a guest of my foundation, a boy who represents the very best of our country's future. Ms. Harrington's actions were born of a prejudice that assumed he couldn't possibly belong. She assaulted him for the crime of daring to exist in a space she felt was reserved for her." As they were finishing, the detective received an update on his radio. "Well," he said, looking up from his notepad, "Ms. Harrington has been formally charged. Assault and battery on a minor, and interference with a flight crew. The second one is a federal charge. The U.S. Attorney's Office has already been notified. She won't be going anywhere for a while." The initial karma had been delivered. Caroline Harrington was spending the night not in a five-star London hotel, but in a county jail, trading her McQueen suit for a standard-issue jumpsuit. A few hours later, Jordan found himself buckling into a seat far more luxurious than the one on the 777. The Gulfstream G650 was a world of polished wood, cream leather, and silent, effortless power. It was just him, Sterling, and Arthur Penhaligon, who Sterling had insisted join them as a thank you for his integrity. As the private jet climbed smoothly into the night sky, leaving Boston, and the ugly incident behind Sterling turned to Jordan. "I want you to understand something, Jordan. That woman, her mindset, that's the past. It's a dying, desperate worldview that lashes out because it knows it's becoming irrelevant. You," he said, pointing a finger at the boy, "are the future. Your mind, your talent, your character. That is what matters. Don't let this incident define your trip. Don't let her bigotry cast a shadow on your achievement." He then smiled a genuine, warm smile. "In fact, I think we can turn this into something positive. When you give your presentation in London, you'll have a bit more of a spotlight on you. Let's make sure you use it." Jordan looked out the window at the endless carpet of stars. The fear and humiliation were beginning to recede, replaced by a nascent sense of strength. He hadn't fought back with his fists, but he had won. His composure had been his shield, and the truth had been his sword. He had been grounded in the harsh reality of prejudice, but now he was soaring above it, heading towards a future that Caroline Harrington had tried and failed to deny him. The wheels of justice had started turning on the ground, but the true consequences of her actions were just beginning to ripple outwards. While Jordan flew towards London in a vessel of quiet luxury, Caroline Harrington's world was imploding in the most public and brutal way imaginable. The story, a perfect storm of privilege, prejudice, and airplane drama, was a viral wildfire. It started with the video. The passenger who had recorded the aftermath of the slap, a marketing student from NYU, had a cousin who worked at a popular online news outlet. Within hours of the plane landing in Boston, the footage was everywhere. The clip was short but devastating. It showed Caroline's snarling face, Jordan's stunned silence, and Arthur Penhaligon's booming condemnation. It was captioned, "Privileged woman assaults black teen in first class for not belonging." By the time Caroline was making her one phone call to a bewildered high-priced lawyer, first-class Karen was the #1 trending topic on Twitter. Her name, Caroline Harrington, was soon linked to the story. Amateur sleuths and journalists quickly identified her as the CEO of Harrington Properties, a boutique but highly successful commercial real estate firm in Manhattan. The backlash was instantaneous and overwhelming. The Yelp and Google review pages for Harrington Properties were carpet-bombed with one-star reviews. They weren't about real estate. They were about her character. Would give 0 stars if I could. The CEO apparently assaults children as a hobby. Their property values are as inflated as their sense of entitlement. Her company website crashed from the sheer volume of traffic. When it was finally restored, the About Us page, which featured a glossy photo of Caroline with a quote about building communities with integrity, became an object of international ridicule. Memes sprouted like weeds. Caroline's enraged face photoshopped onto movie villains, her picture next to dictionary definitions of hubris and entitlement. The mainstream media pounced. The New York Times ran a story with the headline, "Real Estate CEO Faces Federal Charges After In-Flight Assault on Award-Winning Teen." The article was particularly damning because it included glowing details about Jordan Brooks and the Sterling Innovations Prize, contrasting his quiet brilliance with her loud bigotry. Robert Sterling had issued a statement through his foundation, calling the incident a disgraceful exhibition of prejudice, and praising Jordan as a young man of extraordinary talent and character who represents the best of America's next generation. The business world, which worships at the altar of public perception, began to excommunicate her. Her firm's largest client, a multi-billion-dollar pension fund that was leasing 3 floors in a midtown skyscraper. She managed, announced they were reviewing their relationship with Harrington Properties, citing a fundamental misalignment of values. This was corporate speak for "we're out." That contract alone represented 40% of her company's annual revenue. 2 of her senior partners' men, who had been with her for over a decade, issued a joint statement announcing their immediate resignation. They claimed they were appalled by the behavior of Ms. Harrington and could no longer work under her leadership. They were already in talks to start their own rival firm, and it was rumored they were taking most of the company's client list with them. The charity board she chaired, a prestigious foundation for the arts, called an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove her. The press release was surgically precise, stating the board cannot be associated with actions that so clearly contradict our mission of fostering an inclusive and respectful community. Her entire life, so carefully curated and fiercely protected, was being dismantled piece by piece. The friends who had once clamored for invitations to her Hampton summer party were now screening her calls. The country club where she played tennis sent a discreet letter informing her that her membership was under review. Her legal troubles were mounting. After a humiliating night in jail, she was released on a staggering $250,000 bond. She faced years in prison if convicted on the federal charge alone. The U.S. Attorney for the District of Massachusetts, a woman known for her tough stance on air rage incidents, made it clear she intended to prosecute the case to the fullest extent of the law. On top of the criminal charges, a civil lawsuit was inevitable. Robert Sterling had connected Jordan's family with one of the best civil rights law firms in the country pro bono. They were preparing a suit against Caroline for assault battery and intentional infliction of emotional distress, seeking damages in the millions. In a desperate attempt at damage control, Caroline hired a high-powered crisis PR firm. They drafted a public apology which was released 5 days after the incident. It was a textbook example of saying nothing while using a lot of words. It spoke of a moment of extreme stress and a misunderstanding that she deeply regretted. She claimed the video didn't show the full context and that she had reacted out of fear. The public saw right through it. The apology was torn to shreds online as a pathetic, self-serving non-apology. The hashtag #full-context started trending with people sarcastically posting videos of toddlers having tantrums with the caption, "She probably feared for her life." The karma was not a single lightning bolt. It was a slow, grinding demolition. Every pillar of Caroline Harrington's life, her business, her social standing, her wealth, her reputation was cracking under the weight of one single, hateful act. She hadn't just slapped a teenager. She had slapped a future he represented, and in doing so had shattered her own. She sat in her cavernous, silent Park Avenue apartment, the foreclosure notices from the bank that financed her business, now arriving a lonely queen in a crumbling castle she had built herself. London was a symphony of contradictions that resonated deeply with Jordan. The city's ancient stones stood as silent witnesses to centuries of history, while gleaming glass towers reached for a technological future. It was a place that had seen empires rise and fall, a place that understood resilience. As the car provided by Robert Sterling whisked him from the private airfield towards the Savoy. Jordan stared out the window, feeling an odd sense of connection to the city's spirit. He too felt like a study in contrasts, a boy whose life was defined by the cool logic of algorithms, now at the center of a very human, very illogical drama. The incident on the plane, which could have shattered his confidence and overshadowed his purpose, instead acted as a crucible. The trauma was real, a low-frequency hum of anxiety that surfaced in quiet moments. But the outpouring of support had forged something stronger in its place. At the pre-summit reception, the story had preceded him. He braced himself for whispers and awkward stares, but found something else entirely. A young robotics prodigy from Japan approached him bowing slightly. "Brooks-san," she said, "your composure was an inspiration." A lanky programmer from Germany clapped him on the shoulder. "What you went through was garbage," he stated bluntly. "But what you did to earn your place here. That is brilliant." They saw him not as a victim, but as a peer defined by his intellect, not his ordeal. Robert Sterling, ever the quiet strategist, was his guide through this new landscape. He didn't shield Jordan. He empowered him. He introduced Jordan to Nobel laureates and tech entrepreneurs with the same simple, powerful introduction. This is Jordan Brooks. He's going to change the world. In these moments, Caroline Harrington and the ugly memory of her slap felt 1,000,000 miles away, a ghost from a different, smaller life. When the day of his presentation arrived, the main auditorium was filled to capacity. News cameras from the BBC and CNN, initially drawn by the sensational human interest story, were now poised to capture the substance behind the headlines. Jordan walked to the podium, the warmth of the stage lights on his face. He took a deep breath, looked out at the sea of faces and began. He didn't mention the flight. He didn't mention prejudice. He simply spoke about his passion. "We live in a world of systems," he began, his voice clear and steady. "Weather patterns, traffic flows, power grids. These systems are chaotic, but they are not random. Within that chaos are patterns, and within those patterns are truths. My work is about finding those truths, about teaching machines to see the patterns we cannot, so we can build a smarter, more sustainable, and more connected future for everyone." He moved through his complex data with an artist's grace, making the esoteric world of computational science accessible and exciting. During the Q&A that followed, a distinguished-looking man with a Cambridge University pin asked a pointed, highly technical question about the scalability of his algorithm. Without missing a beat, Jordan not only answered the question, but whiteboarded a modification to his core code on the fly that addressed the potential issue, a feat of mental agility that drew gasps from the experts in the room. When he finished, the applause began as a trickle and then swelled into a roar. It was a validation that went deeper than any prize. It was for the work, for the mind, for the sheer force of his brilliance that refused to be dimmed. As he walked off stage, Robert Sterling was the first to greet him, a rare, beaming smile on his face. "I told them you were the future," Sterling said, his voice thick with pride. "Now they've seen it for themselves." In the weeks and months that followed, Jordan's future began to arrive in a flood of emails and thick envelopes. He and his parents would gather around the kitchen table, opening them one by one. The acceptance from Caltech, the full scholarship from Stanford, and then the one from MIT, his lifelong dream, not just with a scholarship, but with a personal note from the head of the computer science department, referencing his legendary London presentation. The joy in his parents' eyes was the ultimate antidote to the humiliation he had felt on that plane. Sterling's internship offer was the capstone, a chance to work on a confidential AI project that was, in his words, 10 years ahead of anything else on the planet. He did one major interview, choosing a respected journalist known for her thoughtful, in-depth profiles. She asked him if he was angry. "Anger is a part of it," he admitted honestly. "But it's an inefficient emotion. It burns hot and fast, but it doesn't build anything. What happened on that plane wasn't really about me. I was just a symbol for her of something she couldn't understand or accept. It was an attack on the idea that talent can come from anywhere, that excellence doesn't have a dress code or a zip code. So the best way I can respond is not with anger, but with excellence. My work, my success, my contribution, that's my answer." His words resonated globally. The Sterling Foundation, guided by Jordan's wishes, established the Flight 114 grant. The idea came from a conversation with his parents about the civil settlement. "This money feels tainted," his mother had said. Jordan replied, "Then let's use it to clean something. Let's use it to open the door for others, so they never have to justify being in the room." The grant would fund promising minority students in STEM, ensuring that hundreds of others would have the chance to fly first class toward their dreams. Meanwhile, the final chapters of Caroline Harrington's life of privilege were being written in the stark, unforgiving language of the law. Faced with an avalanche of evidence, the viral video, the damning testimony of a retired judge, a powerful CEO, and the entire flight crew, her lawyers knew a trial was unwinnable. In a sterile Boston courtroom, a humbled, visibly aged Caroline pleaded guilty. The judge, a woman who had seen her share of arrogance, looked down from the bench. "Your actions, Ms. Harrington," she said, her voice laced with contempt, "were not just an assault on a child, but an assault on the very decency we expect in a civilized society. You saw a young man, and in your blinding arrogance, you failed to see his humanity. Let this sentence be a reminder that in the eyes of the law, your net worth is irrelevant." The sentence was a public humiliation. 2 years of probation, a $100,000 fine, and 500 hours of community service. And the final crushing irony, she was placed on the permanent federal no-fly list. A woman whose life had been a blur of international travel was now grounded forever. The community service was served at a soup kitchen in a bleak corner of Queens. Here, stripped of her designer clothes and her identity, she was just another pair of hands, scrubbing pots and ladling stew for people she once would have crossed the street to avoid. One afternoon, A man she was serving looked at her, his eyes widening in recognition. "Hey," he said, "you're that lady from the plane." Caroline froze her face, burning with a shame so profound it was physically painful. She said nothing, just slammed another ladle of soup onto his tray and turned away. Her company was a carcass picked clean by competitors and lawsuits. Harrington Properties was bankrupt. Her Park Avenue apartment and Hampton's estate were liquidated. The fall was absolute. 10 years later, Dr. Jordan Brooks stood in his lab at MIT, the glow of a holographic display illuminating a complex neural network. He was now a leader in his field, his work on AI-driven climate modeling, revolutionizing the industry. A young graduate student, a brilliant young woman from the Bronx, and the first ever recipient of the Flight 114 grant approached him nervously with a problem. He turned a warm, encouraging smile on his face and began to walk her through the complex equations. In that moment, he was the mentor, the guide, the one opening the door. He rarely thought of Caroline Harrington. The incident was no longer a wound, but a scar, a faint silvery line that served as a reminder. It was a reminder that ignorance, though loud, was fragile. It was a reminder that one person's hateful act could be transformed by the integrity of others into a catalyst for immense good. Caroline had tried to define him by her limited, prejudiced worldview. But she had failed. He had taken her attempt to ground him and used it as fuel, launching himself into a stratosphere of success and influence. She could never reach a future he had not just reclaimed, but had brilliantly and unequivocally earned. In the end, this story is more than just an account of in-flight drama. It's a powerful reminder that the character we show in moments of conflict defines us. Jordan Brooks, with his quiet dignity and unshakable composure, proved that true strength isn't about the noise you make, but the integrity you hold. Caroline Harrington's story serves as a stark warning. Prejudice and entitlement are a heavy baggage, and eventually they will ground you often in the most public and spectacular fashion. Justice in this case wasn't just served by the authorities, but by a community, a pilot, a witness, a CEO, and the public who refused to let hatred have the last word. If this story resonated with you, please consider hitting that like button to help it reach more people. Share it with someone who needs to hear a story of resilience and righteous karma. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell for more real-life stories where character is tested and justice eventually always finds its way. Thank you for listening.